All right, so update on the war, the current Gulf War. So as we went out a week ago, last Monday, we were all hanging a bit in the air because the Donald, had issued a sternly worded warning to Iran, basically saying the next day, last Tuesday, they had to open the effing strait or there was going to be serious problems, was what he basically said. And he said if it wasn't, then he was going to start destroying all of the civilian infrastructure in Iran. He was going to ping all the power stations, the water treatment plants, etc., etc. And the Iranians just said, well, whatever you do, we'll respond in kind. And they certainly have been. They have not broken any promises, the Iranians. If they've said they'll do something, they've done it. As opposed to the Donald, who doesn't matter what he says one day, he'll say something different the next day. And it is so sad. I had great hopes for the Donald. I thought he was a man who was going to step out of the mainstream. He wasn't a career politician, and he was going to say and do things that made a difference. Well, he says and does something different every day, doesn't he? Which is a real shame. Anyhow,
Yeah, he's all over the place.
this time last week, Iran had basically overnight to get the strait open, or there was going to be huge problems. That was the position we were in a week ago. And Trump did what's called a taco. So the next morning came and he changed his story. So by the next morning, instead of being, we're going to start bombing right now, by the next morning, the Tuesday morning, their time, the story had shifted to, okay, we're having a 14-day ceasefire. Now, the ceasefire apparently was contingent on a couple of things. So the Iranians had to immediately open the strait, which isn't likely to happen because, as we discussed, that's their Schwerpunkt, that's their major weapon. But I do remember thinking at the time, you know what? Even if they get a ceasefire, even if the Americans agree to not bomb Iran, and even if the Iranians did say, okay, we'll let ships pass, my concern was that Israel historically always breaks these deals immediately. And no different this time. Israel immediately broke it. Within a day, Israel put in their biggest attack on Lebanon of the entire current conflict. Such a big attack that apparently they killed 250 people and injured more than 1,100. And that was within a day. So, yep, even if the Iranians had stopped and even if the Americans had stopped, it didn't matter because the Israelis didn't. And the Israelis are part of that. So the Israelis basically torpedoed that deal within 24 hours, even though it was like a 14-day alleged ceasefire. And I just want to take a little detour here to re-go over something we went over last week. And that is, look at what we call the injured to killed ratio here. So in this story, those attacks on Lebanon killed 1,165 people and injured 254. Sorry, other way around. Injured 1,160 and killed 250. Now, obviously, some of the injured will die, so the killed numbers will go up a bit. But basically, that's a 4.6 to 1. And if you remember, we talked about that. That is perfectly concordant with the numbers you expect in the sort of war we're getting. So Lebanon is being bombed from the air. Most of this damage was airstrikes and bombs. And that matched with quite a few wars that I mentioned, so Vietnam, Iraq and Afghanistan. The injured to killed ratios were similar. And they should be the same for the American casualties because, again, in this war, most of the American casualties have been through missiles and drone strikes on their bases. So effectively bombing. And as we discussed last week, the US injured to killed ratio was 28 to 1. It's never been that high in the history of warfare. It's discordant, and a similar sort of major attack in Lebanon this week is matched what you'd expect, 4.6 to 1, about 5 to 1. which is very, very different from what the Americans are claiming based on a similar injury mechanism in a similar war, similar part of the world. So again, I'll just say that I think the Americans are lying about their death numbers. I think they're hiding a lot of deaths because there is no reason why they're getting so few killed versus injured in basically the same sorts of attacks. So watch for that. When the dust finally settles, we might find that they were telling porky pies about their numbers here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in response to that, so we had a open the effing straight or else everything's, I'm going to bomb everything back to the Stone Age, followed by the next morning, okay, you got 2 weeks, provided 2 weeks ceasefire. And then where the Israelis break it immediately. And in response to the Israelis breaking it immediately, the Iranians said, okay, the strait's closed. So the whole premise of the ceasefire was the ceasefire, what the Iranians were going to do was open the strait. What the Americans were going to do was stop bombing. Well, the Israelis were included under the American banner. They kept bombing, so Iran immediately closed the strait again. So the ceasefire didn't even last a day. No surprise, because historically this is what Israel does. It always breaks ceasefires. Now, Bibi came out almost immediately and said, well, the ceasefire never applied to Lebanon anyway. It didn't apply to us. So that was Bibi's excuse for it. And almost immediately, US Vice President Vance, who's been acting as the principal negotiator, he backed that up. He said, yep, that's correct. There was a mistake or there was a misunderstanding and the ceasefire never applied to Lebanon. So the Iranians are being unreasonable because, Lebanon was never part of the ceasefire. But there's plenty of evidence that it was, because Trump had already tweeted out that the Iranian 10-point proposal, which included a ceasefire in Lebanon, was a workable basis for the ceasefire. So Trump had already said that, yeah, it does apply to all theatres. And in fact, the initial statement for the ceasefire, which came from the Pakistani Prime Minister, because the peace talks were held in Pakistan, the negotiations were happening in Islamabad, and his announcement of the ceasefire said that Iran and the United States of America, along with their allies, have agreed to an immediate ceasefire everywhere, including Lebanon. So it is not true that Lebanon was not included. The negotiators specifically included, and the Israelis, as usual, typically broke it. And my read on that is that Israel's controlling this war, not the Americans. I think the Israelis knew that the agreement was that they would stop bombing Lebanon. They just did it anyway, because the end of the war does not suit the Israelis. So now, regardless of that, regardless of the so-called talks, once the Israelis broke the ceasefire by bombing Lebanon, the Iranians responded by attacking the Trans-Saudi pipeline, which we discussed a week ago. And that's this pipeline, very important safety valve to the Persian Gulf, because it allows the Saudis to export oil not through the closed Strait of Hormuz, but instead to ship it across to the Red Sea, get it out through there. So the Iranians attacked that as soon as the ceasefire was broken. And this is very important, because that was one of the main ways that the Strait of Hormuz could be bypassed. In fact, it's the principal way that the Strait of Hormuz could be bypassed. So the Iranians attacked the pipeline, which shut it down for a period of time. Allegedly, it's been repaired already. But the Iranians showed that they can totally shut down oil exports from Saudi Arabia, even though they've got this bypass, because it's very easy to target a pipeline. Now, the Saudis said that they restarted the pipeline, which is good if true. But if it's not true, it's a huge problem, because storage of oil once it's produced from a field is very difficult. The whole Persian Gulf is set up to get the oil out of the ground, get it into a storage tank, get it into a tanker and get it moved on. So as more oil can go in the tank and go into the next ship. That's really important. And if you can't ship your oil out after your tanks fill up, you have to shut the oil field down. And that is a technical process that is nowhere as easy as it sounds. And from my reading, restarting a field after it's shut down can take weeks or months and can damage it permanently. So if the Iranians permanently close off that pipeline, they could do permanent damage to the Saudi oil fields going forward into the future. And they probably have done for Kuwait and other fields that have already had to shut down. So it is no small thing.
Yep.
This is all in the last week, Mark.
Yeah, crazy stuff.
Now, despite these glitches, despite the ceasefire being broken almost immediately, the peace talks still went ahead in Islamabad, in Pakistan, over the weekend. And I'm a bit surprised that the Iranians even turned up, because the preconditions for turning up for talks had not been met. There was no ceasefire at the time. So the fact that they even turned up was a surprise. Now, during the talks, Trump was televised saying to the media that his main goal for the peace talks, 99% of the goal, with his direct words, was to ensure that Iran did not have or get a nuclear weapon. He said that was 99% of the goal there. So that, by the way, is something they had before they went to war. The Iranians have never had a nuclear weapon. So that goal could have been met simply by not doing what they did, which was by going to war. Now, despite this, the Israelis in particular have been claiming for 30 or 40 years that Iran is just about to get the bomb. And Mark, are you still there, my friend? I've lost your camera.
No, still here, brother. Just had to sort something.
Time for you to play BB. You're just putting your makeup on, are you?
Yeah, something like that, brother. Anyway, it's coming. Here we go. Time for BB.
It's 40 years of they're about to get the bomb.
Line before.
Iran has never given up its quest for nuclear weapons and the missiles to deliver them.
That's because Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying this for more than 30 years, claiming Iran is close to having
nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons, nuclear weapons, atomic bombs.
In 1992, as a member of parliament, Netanyahu addresses the Knesset. He says, within 3 to 5 years, we can assume that Iran will become autonomous in its ability to develop and produce a nuclear bomb. 3 years later, in his book Fighting Terrorism, he repeats the same time frame, 3 to 5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Fast forward to 2002. Netanyahu testifies before a U.S. congressional committee actively calling for the invasion of Iraq.
Are there any other nations that you would recommend that the United States launch preemptive attacks upon at this point?
The two nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran.
The invasion happens months later.
Who would you like us to
weapons of
invade?
mass destruction are found in Iraq.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a fragment of a 2009 U.S. State Department cable released by WikiLeaks. Netanyahu tells members of Congress that Iran is 1 or 2 years away from being capable of developing nuclear weapons.
They're online.
It's 2012, and Netanyahu is holding up his infamous cartoon bomb at the UN General Assembly.
By next spring, at most, by next summer, at current enrichment rates, they will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks, before they get enough enriched uranium for the first bomb.
And now, 33 years after Netanyahu's first so-called imminent warning, Israel attacks Iran.
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year.
That's despite the US Director of National Intelligence saying Iran isn't building a nuclear weapon months earlier.
Iran lied.
But for Netanyahu,
Big time.
the slogan has been the same for decades. Dmitry
Yeah.
Medvedenko, Al Jazeera.
Make sure to subscribe to our.
There you go.
So Israel has been claiming that Iran's been on the verge of a nuclear weapon for 33 years plus. And in fact, in order to go to war, you need what's called an imminent threat. So the Americans justified this on the basis that Iran was, again, just about to get a nuclear bomb. That's why they had to start this war 6 weeks ago. Now, remember, it's only 6 months since they destroyed their nuclear program and, in fact, set it back by years when they bombed Fordo, which we discussed in the question previously. So in that 6 months, they've got all the way back to almost getting a bomb again, same as they've been for 30-something years. They've never had a bomb, despite all the Israeli claims. And in fact, their supreme leader, the one that they killed on day one of the war, had issued a religious fatwa, so a religious decree that said you can't have nuclear weapons. They're haram. They're religiously not allowed because of what they are and how they work. So that's why the Americans had to suddenly go back and attack Iran 6 weeks ago and cause us and the rest of the world so much economic and financial pain, because yet again, they're about to get a nuclear weapon, apparently.
Yep. Yep.
So,
And again, I mean, we've got to reiterate here, Bruce, and we've talked about it before. This is not a condoning the regimes, the Islamic regimes that have been ruling these countries and oppressing their people as well. There's a lot at play here, right? So we're not, you know, I mean, I know that you're not sympathetic towards these type of governments that are oppressing their people, but there's a lot more play here, isn't there?
I'm not supporting Iran here, but I think their record of not attacking their neighbours as often as Israel and the US has done is pretty good. I don't think the US or Israel had a casus belli here. Casus belli is a cause for war. And they went ahead anyway. They made a huge blunder. They've bitten off more than they can chew. And the worldwide consequences I expect to be very severe. Very severe.
Yep. Yep.
All right, give me the slides back.
We've brought it up plenty of times where you know, you've brought the Quran out, you've read it, you've talked about the kind of fundamentalists, the people that are actually, you know, doing all this stuff all around the world. So there's definitely shouldn't be any questions about that.
Yep.
You've been quite balanced on all these topics.
Just so as you know.
Mm-hmm.
How come there's no label on the front of this book that you sent me, Mark?
Well, did you want me to put to Dear Bruce on it?
Oh, shouldn't it say the Bible or something?
So on the
Oh,
side?
it's on there. It's on the edge.
It's on the edge, brother.
me
Anyway, you still
all year
got
to
a
get
long
that.
way to go. You still got a long way to go, brother. You've got a long way to go. A lot of discernment still to do there, mate.
Still in Genesis. Yeah.
Mm.
Anyway, where was I? So during the peace talks which just failed, Trump said that 99% of what the US was trying to achieve here was that Iran would be prevented from getting a nuclear weapon. Now, I might add that the US and Israel have both got lots of nuclear weapons. Nobody seems to think that that's discordant. And, you know, if the Americans and the Israelis want to say, oh, well, we would never attack our neighbours. Hello? Hello?
Yeah. What's America done for the last bloody number of decades is like regime change and the CIA going in there, and you know that's almost common knowledge now. Like even like normies now, the mainstream media even reports about regime change and bloody all this stuff, right? So it's like, really, come on.
So 99% of the war aim here was to prevent the Iranians getting a bomb, which they already had a leader that said was haram, was forbidden. And I guess the only 1% left was that Trump also wanted the Strait reopened. So the 1% left was Strait of Hormuz has got to be, if I can quote him from last week, effing opened. That was a week ago, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Now, I might point out that both of those conditions existed before Israel and the US started bombing Iran.
Mm.
So their current war aims are to get back to where they were before they started the war. That's pretty poor return, I would have said. Anyway, so where were we? So we're stepping through the week, and so much happened during the week. So on Sunday, yesterday, whilst the talks were coming to a failed close, it was reported that 2 US warships did transit the Strait of Hormuz, and the implication was, see, the US Navy's just reopened the strait. That's what we were told. Now, two things. One is to do so under a truce, under a ceasefire, is a bit disingenuous anyway. But where the US is being extremely disingenuous is how they framed it. So CENTCOM, that's the military command that controls US forces in that part of the world, issued this statement a couple of days ago now. It said that US forces, the US Navy, has started mine clearance in the Strait of Hormuz. And they listed the 2 ships that were involved, so a couple of guided missile destroyers. This was extremely deceptive for them to say that. So not only was the passage not contested because it was under a flag of truce, but it wasn't a mine clearance mission. And it can't be a mine clearance mission because those 2 ships have virtually no mine clearing ability. They're guided missile destroyers. Minesweeping is a very specialised mission, requires very specialised ships, and it requires long-term physical presence. And to back that up, this is what the AIs said, and I wouldn't trust the AIs too much, but there's really no doubt on this. Those 2 destroyers are what's called Arleigh Burke destroyers. And so I asked the Googles, can these vessels sweep mines? And the answer was no. The Arleigh Burke destroyer is not designed for mine sweeping. Its primary roles are air defence, etc., etc., etc. So these commencement of mine sweeping operations with these 2 destroyers is completely disingenuous. It's fraudulent. Those ships are not capable of clearing mines, apart from the old do it once, then throw the ship away method. And so this was just a complete con. This was not the start of mine sweeping operations. And why this is important is because that's one of the prime ways that the Iranians are going to keep the strait closed, by mining it. Now, it turned out the Iranians said that they issued a warning to these ships, during the peace talks that they better turn around or they get attacked, and apparently they did. So I think it was all a publicity stunt by the Americans, which achieved nothing, and their marketing of it is extremely dishonest.
Yeah, yep. It just seems to be like more of a propaganda campaign again, doesn't it? It's like to keep the masses distracted, and it's what it's really all about, isn't it?
Look, it's always a propaganda campaign, and you and I learnt during COVID, if we didn't already know it, that our own government lies to us all the time. It's no different during war. The US is lying to its people about the war. The Iranian government's probably lying to its people about the war. I'm just presenting what I hoover up from open source intelligence and how I interpret it. I'm not just reading to you what the government news report is, the press release is. I'm telling you, these are all the things that reported, and these are how I interpret them.
Yep.
Anyhow, it's pretty soon after this mine sweeping operation in the Strait of Hormuz, the talks broke down. Like I said, I'm surprised they even started, given that there was no ceasefire, given that the Israelis broke it even before the talks started, and it was a precondition. So after one day of negotiations, the talks broke down, and the American negotiators went home. They left, and I believe the Iranians have left as well. So 14-day ceasefire and peace talks basically broke down immediately. And so following that, the US position changed again. And I think I got in trouble once before saying rather schizophrenically, the the Trump's response to open the effing strait or else, and the Iranians saying, make us, his response was, well, we'll close it ourselves. So the Americans' counter to that is, okay, well, if you won't open the strait, we're going to blockade the strait ourselves. Well, not sure how that opens it.
Maybe that was
and
the whole
frankly,
point. Whole point all along, Bruce. Some people might be saying that might be the point all along, to create what we currently got going on in the world. But who knows? There's so many moving pieces.
I don't believe Trump's playing 4D chess. I don't think he's capable of it. And even if he is, I reference Brett Weinstein's comments about complex systems. You might think you've got a cunning plan here, Blackadder, but you know what? There's so many pieces and levers and things on the board that you don't control what you think you control. It can all go belly up, however clever you think you are.
Yeah. 100%.
So the Americans have said, all right, we're going to blockade the strait ourselves. I don't know why they didn't do it from the start, because apparently the Iranians have been shipping oil out the whole time. Well, I do know why. The reason I do is because the main weapon that the Iranians can wield against the West is, we will cause you economic pain by pushing oil prices up. That's their main weapon. So the US was actually allowing Iranian oil to be sold on the world market to keep the oil prices from going up too much at the same time as they're at war with Iran. It's just, where's John Larder and the you can't make this stuff up flag, really?
Yeah, I know, right? We need to get a spoon.
And by the way, the other bad guy regime in the world at the moment is the evil Russians, who've been under sanctions for several years over the Ukraine war. And the Americans have also lifted the sanctions on the Russians selling their oil. So
interesting.
we had the situation where the two major evil regimes, Russia and Iran, according to the US, not only had increased demand for their product, but they were selling it at a higher price.
Yeah.
And thus hurting the US and hurting the rest of the world. I mean, literally, you can't make this stuff up.
Well, it looks like the propaganda worked in Hungary with Orban, because they reckon that Orban was too close to be in bed with Trump, and so they said that he got ousted. But a lot of things happen in elections, don't we? They can be manipulated. But I like this comment from BW. I like you've said this before, Bruce. The hypothesis that Trump is affected by the C jabs, one to share with parents who hate Trump but took the jab, get 2 points made in one sentence.
And I'll bring you the receipts on that when we get into the health section.
Well, there you go. Yep.
But before we do, let's finish off on this week in the Gulf. So the US Navy's announced that they're going to blockade the strait as well. But I make the point that this does not mean that the US Navy now controls the Strait of Hormuz. Them blockading it, apart from doing a quick thunder run under the cover of peace talks, does not mean that the US Navy is going to be operating warships in the strait, because if they do, the Iranians are going to start sinking them. So they're going to be doing what's called a distant blockade. They're going to be hundreds, if not 1,000 kilometres away in the circled area, which, by the way, is where their carriers are operating. Their carriers can't operate close to Iran because the Iranian missile threat is too large. So they're going to be doing a distant blockade, which means they're going to be monitoring ships that leave the Gulf and intercepting them on the high seas, also known as piracy.
Yes.
Also known as piracy. So it's not a blockade that the US has said they're going to do, it's piracy. And very sadly, for those who know your history, the US Marines were birthed to deal with the Barbary pirates, I think back in the 1800s. They were an anti-piracy force, basically, the US Marine Force. And here we are, we've flipped it, and they'll probably be crewing the helicopters which are actually doing the raids on ships. They've probably come 180 degrees on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And what all this means for us and the rest of the world is a lot more financial pressure on both the supply and price of oil. And I do my my financial numbers, so the Bitcoin price, the gold price, and the oil price. I do them on Sundays when all the markets are closed. So I had to do an update today because the Sunday price for Brent crude, which is effectively the European oil price, was $95. And when the markets opened, that bounced up 8% to nearly 103. And I expect it to go much higher. I still regard that as a very low number that's not factoring in the very serious threats to oil supplies from the Persian Gulf.
Mm. Mm. Very interesting.
So here's my end of week 6 scorecard. So in week 6 of the 4-day war, where are we at? So we had a 14-day ceasefire announced at the start of the week, but it really never got going at all. The Israelis broke it immediately. As a result, the peace talks in Islamabad also broke down within a day or so of starting. And as a result of that, the US stormed out of the room, threw their toys out of the cot and said, okay, well, if you won't open the strait, we're closing it. So the US said, we're shutting the strait down. And Iran said, yeah, well, okay, well, we're going to shut it down to ships that we don't allow out. So we've got a double closure of the strait here. And last week I said, as long as the strait's closed, Iran is winning. Well, now we got both belligerents closing the strait, so Iran is still winning.
Well, one way to look at it, Bruce, though, is that now that the strait's closed, the internationalists, the globalists, are winning because, you know, they do want to impart their great reset, Bruce. So it could be part of a much bigger thing. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, well, putting costs up massively is a big part of the you will own nothing thing, isn't it? You lose your house because you can't afford it. Your car loan will go default and probably lose your job. Yeah, perfect.
Yep,
As we said
stripping the
before,
low and middle class again, right? So who does it normally affect? All these things that happen, like COVID, you know, who did it affect most, right? Like people, I mean, you know, you've worked really hard. Like I said, you're well, you know, you're educated, you worked hard all your life, you've set yourself up, right? And there's a lot of people that are in that position that, you know, sucked off the government teat, off the taxpayer teat, to put themselves in the same position. A lot of other people. And, you know, the people that benefited the most, the multinationals, the conglomerates, the massive conglomerates over COVID, we look at all the things that were closed down, you know, what was closed and what was open, you only had to look at that, right? So it was a massive wealth transfer. So this is the same thing again. Who are the people that suffer the most with what's currently going on in the world? It's the low and middle class, right? And it's about destroying the middle class.
Bob's Hardware was closed, Bunnings was open.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly right.
Coles, Woolies, all that, and all the things that are kind of, you know, undermine, you know, the family, the natural family, and things. You know, brothels were open. You know, like
Churches were closed.
Churches were closed, brothels were open. Now, I worked that one out. I couldn't really understand that. Right? You went to a coffee shop, and you had to, when you were sitting down eating, you could take your mask off, but when you were standing up at a certain height, you have to mask on. So it was so virulent that it was, you know, you just couldn't stand up. Yet you were able to be intimate with someone at very close. You know, the brothels were just like fully open. Now I'm telling you, you know, me as a Christian, right? This is pure evil. What has been instilled and instigated with all these action is pure evil. But anyway, enough of that. This is not my faith, culture, politics. This is Wake Up Australia. So I'm not going to get on a rant there for you.
It's not meant to make sense. It's meant to change all the time so you don't know what's real anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Reference the US political positions as stated by Trump. They change every day. None of it makes sense. Same with COVID. Standing up, sitting down, none of it makes sense. It's not meant to. It's not meant to.
No. Are you finished with that section? Was that a wrap up on that?
Almost. So let's have the. Where's me?
I do want to play one thing for you just to get your take on it.
Okay, give me one more. So
no, that's all right. Based on this,
that was my end of week 6, and I'll throw that word Schwerpunkt at you again, which is a classic concept from Clausewitz. Clausewitz being one of the great military writers, and Sun Tzu, The Art of War, was another one, and somebody here's memeing Don Tzu here, saying that, yes, the key here is you can break an enemy blockade by blockading their blockade. It's not meant to make sense, Mark.
No, of course not. Schwerpunkt.
Schwerpunkt, the key point, the center of gravity, the thing which you have to focus on to win or lose. And as I've said, the Schwerpunkt here is the straight open or closed. If it's closed, Iran's winning. If it's open, Iran's losing.
Yep.
Over to you,
Absolutely.
sir.
Just wanted to, I had something shared with me that a video, someone sent it through to me, and I thought I'd get your critique on it, because we've just covered this whole section about Iran and that, but and especially in regards to Trump. So I'm just going to play this for you. It's about 3 minutes, so I'm just going to see what you think about it.
Okay, so what if Trump is not an idiot? What if losing the war in Iran is exactly the plan? Let me show you something the media will never tell you. So everyone is saying Trump is destroying America. He is fighting an unwinnable war in Iran. He is threatening to invade with ground troops. He is pissing off NATO by threatening Greenland. He is picking fights with Canada, Mexico, Denmark, Colombia. JP Morgan says the world will run out of oil by mid-April. The global economy is about to collapse. Trump looks like the worst president in history, a complete buffoon, right? But what if that's the whole point? What if Trump wants to lose the war in Iran? What if he wants the American empire to collapse? What if he wants to destroy the global economy? Then he would be a genius. Let me explain. Right now, the world gets 20% of its oil from the Middle East. Japan gets around 75% from the Middle East. India gets around 60%. China gets around 50%. Europe is also heavily dependent. But here's the thing, oil is not rare. Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves. Canada has massive reserves. United States has massive reserves. Trump just took over Venezuela in January. He's threatening to take over Canada. You see where this is going. If Trump closes the Strait of Hormuz by fighting Iran, the Middle East oil stops flowing, but North America is still pumping. Suddenly Europe, China, Japan, South Korea, they all would need American oil. And not just oil, fertilizer too. The nitrogen for food production also comes from the Middle East. If that's cut off, where do they turn? There are only two options, North America and Russia. Trump is making the entire world dependent on the resources he controls. Now here is the genius part. Who owns the most US debt? Who's financing America's $39 trillion? It's Japan, China, Taiwan, South Korea, UK, France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, the same countries that need Middle East oil. There's been this fear that these countries would stop buying US Treasury bonds, that they would move to gold or Swiss francs, that America's Ponzi scheme would collapse. But now they need American energy. They need American resources. They can't abandon the dollar. They are trapped. Trump just turned America's biggest weakness, its debt, into its greatest weapon. By starting an unwinnable war in Iran, he's forcing the entire world to depend on North America. This isn't new. Putin already proved that this strategy works in Ukraine. Russia has been fighting for 5 years. It's a slow grind, but it has restructured Russia's entire economy around war production, drones, ammunitions, and military manufacturing. Russia went from importing Iranian drones to making their own and now exporting them to Iran. Putin's plan was that the world is collapsing anyway, so why not build a fortress, make Russia self-sufficient, control the resources, and weather the storm? America saw this and said, we can do the same. Greenland for rare earth minerals, Canada for oil and resources, Venezuela for oil reserves, Mexico for manufacturing, Panama Canal for trade control. So maybe Trump is not being reckless. He is actually building a self-sufficient North American fortress while the rest of the world burns. So yes, Trump looks like an idiot. Yes, he's losing the war in Iran. Yes, he's destroying the global economy. But if the goal was to end the American empire and rebuild it for Americans, to make the world dependent on US resources while everyone else collapses, then Trump might go down as the greatest American president in history. Maybe the New World Order is dead, and maybe we are heading towards a Trump world order.
There you go. I just thought I'd just chuck that out to you to see what you and others in the chat think about that little strategy.
Well, it's a cunning plan, as Blackadder would say. And the problem with that is the complex system problem that Brett Weinstein would come back with. There's a lot of pieces to that plan. It all has to go right, and nothing has to crop up that you didn't plan for. And in complex systems, things always crop up that you didn't plan for. You can never control everything. And even if you could, people just won't go along with it. It's why communism always fails. You might have the greatest 5-year plan, and we'll do this, the price of that'll be, and we'll build these. And the people, well, I'm not going along with it, which means you have to force them to go along with it, which means you get a violent dictatorship. And ultimately, you get 1 million people surrounding your government building and you end up hanging somewhere. So, no, for a start, I don't believe, even if they have a cunning plan, I don't believe they can carry it off, because cunning plans never work. The world is too complex. Now, the other problem with this cunning plan is that oil is largely what you call fungible. So fungible means exchangeable. So let's say you did shut down the oil supplies from the Persian Gulf, and America says, that's fine, just take our oil. Okay, you've then got the exchange of oil between, does America sell the oil overseas to get money, or do the American consumers buy it at home? And even now, it is said that America is largely self-sufficient in oil at the moment. Nevertheless, their gas prices are up like 20 or 30% a gallon at home. They might be self-sufficient on oil, but you know what? If you cut off the Persian Gulf, the rest of the world starts competing either for American oil or other oil that Americans might have been getting themselves, Venezuela, whatever. So the end result is, if you cut off the supply, the price goes up everywhere, including in places that think they're self-sufficient. And if you do that in a democracy, people aren't going to be very happy. And what's more likely is that Trump will get turfed out on his ear. Second-term president, he's gone anyway, but he's likely to lose the House and maybe the Senate in the midterms, which are this year, because people don't want to be paying $4 or $5 for their gas in Texas, irrespective of his long-term plan. He's going to lose it by getting losing the midterms, and then the Democrats will take the House and change everything in 2 years after that.
Yeah.
Nice plan. You won't be able to pull it off.
Yeah. And again, that was just a theory from someone else, so that's all right. Now, where was your slides? What did I do? How did I pull that off? Oh, there's yours.
Good
That's
old
where we're
Don
at.
Zoo. All
Don
right.
Zoo. I like Don Zoo. I like the
And
Don
I've read
Zoo.
that book, and I wish I could just turn and pull Sun Tzu and Clausewitz off the bookshelf there, but they're in the other room bookshelf. All right, we better get into the real show now that we're an hour in, and all we've done is rehash the events of the week so far.
That's all right. It's still important to get your take on what you've been observing in the global war and not global war, the international stuff. So yeah,
It's a global war, Mark.
Yeah, it is. That's right. We're financial war. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Wars are financial. All wars are bankers' wars. Yep.
Yep. Big money in arms, isn't there?
Fantastic profits.